Stephanie Smith. I'm the State Hazard Mitigation Officer at Vermont Emergency Management, so I manage our hazard mitigation program for the state. Just quickly starting on what is hazard mitigation. So this is it's a FEMA term, it's a little clunky, but really what we're talking about is doing work that reduces our long-term future risk. So in this example here, this is a property buyout where it's a home that was flooded during Tropical Storm Irene. That structure is now gone. The site is maintained as open space. So now the next time the river needs to access it, it can do that and there's nothing in the way. So we've fully removed the risk in this example. So within the program, we have grants and we have planning. So I'm going to spend most of the time talking about our grant programs and available funding. But I'll start with a quick overview of our state hazard mitigation plans. This is a document that we update every 5 years. We just completed the most recent version in November of 2023 and received FEMA approval. And it addresses all natural hazards that the state of Vermont is vulnerable to, as well as proposing a strategy for improving resilience in the state. As a part of that, local hazard mitigation plans are also required at the municipal level. The requirement is in order to receive any FEMA hazard mitigation funding or funding under our state flood resilient communities fund. So the money I'm about to talk about, one of those requirements is that you have a local hazard mitigation plan and that it meets and is in alignment with our state plan. This is just a quick snapshot of the funding that we have within our program. There's two things in particular that I'll get into in a little more detail, which is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program on the FEMA side, as well as the Flood Mitigation Swift Current Program, which is relatively new. I'm going to start with a couple of case studies first, because I want to give you a sense of what types of projects are eligible. So the overview of eligible projects. One of the main things that we fund through all of our programs is property buyouts. These are property buyouts that have flood risk, but haven't necessarily flooded in the past. And then we can also do landslide risk properties. Floodplain restoration is another big category of what we fund across programs, under all of these programs, which is really where we're opening up space, giving the river access to its floodplain to reduce flood levels. We can also do infrastructure projects such as upsizing bridges and culverts, or relocating roads, or doing resilience improvements to roadways. We can do structural elevation projects, as well as floodproofing. We have funding available to update or develop local hazard mitigation plans, and we can also do planning and other scoping activities. So just a couple of quick examples. I wanted to start in the town of Northfield. So these are all examples of projects that took place following Tropical Storm Irene that held up very well during the July flooding in 2023. So this is Dog River Park in Northfield, and all of the numbers in green, those are property buyouts that we did. Those are the addresses where we've completed property buyouts. And this was an area that has significant flood risk, flooded during Irene. We were able to remove all of the structures in this area, and then the community was able to apply for funding to do floodplain restoration work. So they could remove fill, lower flood elevations in the surrounding neighborhood, which was incredibly successful in July at lowering flood levels in the surrounding area for remaining homes. But it's also an opportunity that's created for them this beautiful park and community asset that most of the time the river doesn't need to access, and it's a benefit to this community. We have two large floodplain restoration projects that I'd like to talk about. And again, those are removing fill to lower floodplain elevations in surrounding neighborhoods. So the first one here is Melrose Terrace. This is a site that flooded during Irene. In black on the left are the structures that were demolished and removed from this site. And then the area in blue is where the floodplain restoration occurred. And there's a little bridge on the way in to the community that was next to that. We were able to put in this overflow culvert, so it gives the river additional space in the event that it's needed. So this is a photo of when we finished the project, right when the plantings had been completed. And shortly thereafter, we had a flood. In the December 2022, there was a flood in this area, and the water came up. You can see where the snow line is. That's where the water was. And we were able to have, this space was enough to collect that water so that it didn't spill out into any surrounding neighborhoods. So it worked as designed. The plantings weren't fully established, so we had to go back and fix a few things in 2023, but worked incredibly well at reducing risk in this neighborhood. And this is just the view from the top of when the water came in December. And then we have a second site, and again, these are both on the whetstone upstream of Brattleboro, where the river's fairly incised. So giving the river space, opening it up to allow for the river to have a space to spill out on during a flood event. And then a large infrastructure project that I'd like to share with you is in Brandon. So during Tropical Storm Irene, the river came up. The Neshobe, it generally goes around downtown, but in this high flow event went straight through downtown and with devastating consequences. And the idea came up of putting in this overflow culvert, which most of the time looks like it does in the bottom right picture here, where it's completely dry. But during a high flood event, it gives the river somewhere else to go. So it can access this culvert and go underneath the community instead of going over it. And it's been successful in multiple flooding events since it was completed. And one more example here is in Cambridge. So if you look at the top right, this used to be a very undersized trail bridge. You can see the abutments pushing into the river. And we were able to put in this much larger span bridge and then also remove fill in this area. And again, it's been incredibly successful in reducing risk in the surrounding neighborhoods within Cambridge. Okay, so 2 grant programs that I'll get into in a little bit more detail. So how can we pay for this type of work in your community? So the biggest pot of funding that we have right now is FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, or HMGP. So following the July flood, this is funding that we get based on disaster allocations following federally declared disaster events. We anticipate over $75 million will be available. There is a required 25% local match for most of these projects. The one exception is that we do have a general fund allocation that's specifically for property buyouts. So we will be able to offer 100% for property buyouts while that funding is available. We anticipate getting a broad announcement out very soon around a letter of interest that would be due in June. That just gives us here's the project we want to do, here's what we have so far, here's what we need, so that we can make decisions around how we support communities going forward in developing those projects completely, so that we can submit them by late 2024. A benefit cost analysis is usually required for most of these projects. It's a very specific FEMA tool that shows FEMA that the project is cost effective. And property elevations and buyouts generally don't need those, but for a lot of the other projects, that's one area that we would need to see whether in that letter of interest timeline you have that or not, or if we need to support communities in getting those developed. So the best use of this large pot is around implementation projects. So buyouts, elevations, upsizing culverts and bridges, doing floodplain restoration work, or removing dams, all of that implementation work fits really well under this pot. And then the second program I'll tell you about is the Flood Mitigation Assistance Swift Current Program. This is a relatively new FEMA program, and following the July flood, Vermont is eligible for up to $40 million. So there's some specific requirements around this, but it requires properties to have flood insurance, and you have to have had it during July when the flood happened. Some properties will be eligible for 90 or 100% cost share, so it reduces that it increases the federal share, reduces that local match. But the deadline is going to come up really fast on May 15th. So, and I apologize, that says 2025, it should say 2024. And the best uses of this funding are implementation of individual projects, including buyouts, elevations, and structural relocation projects. So really the residential projects mostly are what will be eligible here. And here's my contact information. I look forward to hearing your questions as we have these seminars.